Hi, Desert Dwellers. This is a special episode of the Desert Sanctuary podcast with Jess Piper, known as the Dirt Road Democrat. She's on because we live less than an hour away from each other, and something happened locally that we wanted to report on. Hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Karl Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. We're happy that you're with us on this Sunday morning. That's when we're recording. I'm Karl Forehand. I'm here with Karl Forehand. We have a very special guest today that we want to get to, but before that, do you have anything you need to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I think I would just encourage the listeners to look at, some of the specials we've been doing. They'll be titled special instead of having a number like a normal podcast. The incident with the Theo Bros, the theology conference, and things like that. We went into quite a bit of detail with that, but there's another episode possibly coming. People back out and kind of come in, and they really don't want to out themselves and things like that.
Which is understandable. Really.
I definitely understand that pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But also this incident in St. Joseph, Missouri, that we're going to talk about today a little bit. And we'll kind of refer you back to another podcast for the details on that. But also this He Gets Us campaign. We're going to do it. Stuart Delaney from Snarky Faith is going to, I'm just so excited that he's the opposite of me. He's sanguine and that kind of thing. Very outgoing and those kind of things. I'm excited to talk to him about the He Gets Us campaign, things like that. So there's several of those episodes. We encourage you to dig in and listen to the episodes. But that's not why we're here today, right?
We're here to talk to Jess Piper, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So Jess is a born and bred Southerner. Well, I like her already. Having spent childhood and young adulthood in several Southern states until she landed in Arkansas. She graduated with a BA in English and an MA in education from the University of Arkansas. Jess is a fierce advocate for rural communities and public schools. She was an American literature teacher for 16 years and decided to run for a House seat in Missouri's 1st District in 2022. Although she lost the race, she continues her activism and is executive director of Blue Missouri and hosts a weekly podcast on the Heartland Pod Network called Dirt Road Democrat. Welcome to the podcast, Jess. We're happy that you're here. We listened to your latest one that we'll kind of refer to today, and it was amazing. So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here with you, Karl and Laura. I really can't wait for this.
Yeah. We focus on this podcast a lot on stories, and over the past 280 episodes, we've learned so much by listening to people's stories, and we think of them as sacred because when someone tells you their story, they're entrusting you with something special. And so we take it really, really seriously because it does so much for us, and it does something for people to tell their story. But we wanted you to have a chance to tell your story to our listeners and whoever this podcast reaches.
Well, my name is Jess, and I was born outside of Louisiana in a hurricane in 1975, and that's sort of been my life trajectory since then. I moved to Missouri around 2008, and I've been a teacher. I was a teacher for 16 years, and I loved my job. I was teaching juniors American literature, which was great because, in small communities, lots of times you have to teach lots of different classes. And I was in Maryville and able to have enough students to just teach the one, and I loved it. And I plan to spend my entire life doing that. But in 2019, Missouri passed an abortion ban with no exceptions for, rape or incest, or for children. And that to me was not okay. And so, I reached out to my lawmaker, who did not care what I had to say. And it really stuck with me at that time that they didn't care, right? No matter what I said. And then in 2020, I went to vote, and there was no Democrat for me to vote for on the state House race. And so I thought, it's enough. If nobody else is going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And so I decided to run, and that changed my entire life, because in Missouri, you can't be a teacher and run for office. So I left my position. I turned my family's world upside down. I became a lightning rod for, progressive politics in Missouri. And that's still the role I'm playing right now.
Mm.
Wow. Well, I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, despite the fact that, you've probably had some attacks come your way. I'm sure of it.
A lot.
Yeah. We live in the state of Missouri too. So in a very small rural town. So I can only imagine.
Yeah.
There's so many things about a small town. You call your podcast the Dirt Road Democrat, relating to that small town thing. There's so many things about a small town that are good.
Mm-hmm.
There's community, there's love, and in crisis, small towns do pretty good. But sometimes we've adopted religious beliefs and political beliefs that really don't serve us anymore. They're not meeting the needs, the greater needs of the world, and things like that. We're just hanging on to what we're comfortable with. Is that kind of your experience of small town America?
Yeah, I wouldn't do anything different. I mean, born and bred in, in small towns, and I graduated from a rural high school. My kids went to rural schools. I love my community. I can't stand traffic. I can't stand that busy lifestyle. And so I do travel a lot. When I come back, it's just kind of like this feeling of, thank God I live in this place where, there's no one behind me. I can let my dogs go out and do whatever. And there's a thing too where, most people in small towns, just the people that I've run into, really are more religious than other sectors of the state. It just goes along with it, right? And their politics a lot of times will follow that religious model, which, like, I was born and raised Southern Baptist. I know that meant that I voted for a Republican. And we do see this religiosity coming out and then impacting politics. People think that being a Republican is an extension of being a Christian, and that's not true. But I ran into that all the time. But I tell you something, I have neighbors across the street, and they're pretty conservative, but I left to go to St. Charles yesterday, or the day before yesterday, and I was almost I was an hour out, and my neighbor called and she said, "Jess, your little dog is out." She got out, and she's a brand new rescue and doesn't know what to do, so she was just running. So my neighbor came over and sat until, and this is the funny part, I called the sheriff's department because I was too far away and my neighbor couldn't catch my dog. And the sheriff's department came out, caught my dog, and put it back in my house for me. Mm-hmm. So that's what it means to live in a small town. We do have these barriers with politics and stuff, but when it comes down to it, your neighbor takes care of you.
Yeah, this is true. Mm-hmm. And we know that when you said you reached out to politicians and they didn't care, mm-hmm. I think what's evolving in religion, especially, in evangelical Christianity, what's evolving is something really horrible, in my opinion. It's Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. It's racism. It's so many horrible things in that. And to say, well, I just practice Christ's love and so on, but we don't see that. Mm-hmm. I don't see that in politics right now.
No, and it's hard because I have so many Christian friends who are not Christian nationalists. right? They are the Christians that are practicing the love that they read of Jesus in the Bible. In general, they're Methodists and Episcopalians, not the Baptists that I grew up with. But the people that I knew in my church aren't the same people anymore. Something has happened. There's a shift, and it is Christian nationalism. And I need folks to understand, when we talk about Christian nationalism, we're not attacking Christianity. We're talking about people who have thrown away their own religion and have gone after America first, MAGA first, before the love of the Christ that they say that they, honor and respect. And so Christian nationalism is not Christianity. It's bastardized. It's this awful formulation of something it was never supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Jesus didn't, hold people down and shove religion down their throat, right? But that's what is happening with these folks. They're not practicing their own religion.
And so let's go ahead and get to it. There is an example of that locally. You and I live 45 minutes away from each other, I think.
Yeah.
I'm glad we've got to meet you now and know one of our neighbors. But so about an hour from me, maybe a little further than that for you, is St. Joseph, Missouri. It's where we shop.
Me too.
A lot of the times. And this church that I used to go to used to be called Grace Evangelical Church, and the pastor was Daryl Jones. We went there for about a year and a half because I was a pastor, and we were kind of taking some time off and wondered whether that's even what we wanted to do anymore. And unfortunately, we got into another church later on. But now it's called Grace Calvary Chapel, and the pastor is Josh Blevins. And so they have decided, this is my summary, that they have decided that they're going to be really active in politics. They have a political page, and you know the name of that probably. But recently, when a person who happens to be a pastor of another church and also happens to be queer, just was doing his thing, being a volunteer on the library board, and these people basically attacked him and forced him out of that position, which was a volunteer position that didn't have anything to do with selecting books or anything that they're against. But they have decided to infiltrate school boards and things like that, and get as many evangelical Christians as they can in those positions. And this is where we kind of both got involved, right? That this is playing out. So tell us more about that situation, kind of fill in the holes I left.
So Brian Kirk is a gay pastor for the First Christian Church in St. Joseph, and he's a wonderful man. And I've been on a couple of different panels with him when he was talking about, racism that was apparent and evident in St. Joseph. He works with folks who are marginalized and oppressed, and he was a volunteer on the St. Joseph Library Board since 2019, I believe. So previous to him coming onto the board, there was a drag show or a drag reading at one of the libraries in St. Joe, which was completely family appropriate, had nothing but a man in beautiful makeup reading to children. And so when Josh Blevins came in, it's important to note that the pastor before there, his name was, what was his name again?
Daryl Jones.
Daryl Jones is now working for the Herzog Corporation, trying to privatize public schools. And so that's important to note, because if you're from anywhere around Northwest Missouri, you know who the Herzogs are and what they're trying to do to our public schools. But anyway, I will say that pastor's now working for them. So Josh Blevins, I believe, is from California, and he came in and he immediately started, ramping up politics in the church. And so they went after Brian Kirk, who they accused of putting on this drag show, which was untrue because Brian wasn't even on the board when that happened. Mm-hmm. Even if he had been, so what? But he wasn't on the board. So that was a lie about him. But Brian had the really boring job of deciding which steps need to be, fixed. he worked on line item budgets. He did not choose programs or books for the library, but they attacked him because he's gay. And so when this happened, I had a whole lot of people, because I do have a big social media platform. I had a lot of people tagging me in this story, and I thought, this is not true. No one is going to be pulled off a library board because they're gay. And I looked at it, and that's exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. They voted they didn't vote to oust him. They voted to not reappoint him to the library board. And it was very evident with the Freedom of Information Act, they were able to get the emails from the city council, library board, and the church. And the church was very specific. We do not want Brian on this board because he is gay. And city council members ceded. They rolled over and they were like, yeah, okay. And then a really important point is to say that the Buchanan County Republican Central Committee sent an email to every single city council member and said, if you ever plan to run as a Republican again and you vote to appoint Brian Kirk to a position, we will make sure you cannot run as a Republican. So they threatened every member of the city council and the mayor with, pulling funding and not getting behind them. So you can't run for office if your central committee, won't back you. And that's what they threatened him with, over a gay pastor on a volunteer library board.
So there's a nation, it seems like at least there's a nationwide effort. This must be some kind of agenda somewhere that we as evangelical Christians are going to get involved in local politics. We're going to get involved in the school boards. And it's not an effort my wife sitting next to me is a third grade teacher, and you were a teacher. And what teachers probably need most is someone to come alongside them and help them. They need money. We invest a lot in our local school because it doesn't have enough money for classroom supplies and things like that. That's what school teachers need, but they're not doing that. They're trying to hurt it. They're trying to infiltrate it, and that what they want more than anything is to teach religion in schools or pull people out of school for an hour a day to come and learn religion, even though they have the corner on that market already. Is that right or wrong? Is that really an effort?
Well, and I was going to interject too, and I don't know if you experienced this or not, Jess, but as a school teacher, I want all my students to feel represented in my classroom. And I feel like I do a really good job up to a certain point, because there is that fear of retaliation if I have books in my classroom about, two moms or two dads or, whatever. So I think I just wanted to interject that. Like that is a source that has brought me to tears, actually, to think that there are students in our school that are not being represented and don't feel, we say, you belong here, you belong in this classroom, and yet they don't see any representation of who they are.
Right. And I'll say that the laws that they're passing are meant to chill. They're meant to make you feel like they didn't say I couldn't do it, but they made me scared enough to keep me from doing it. So you are self-censoring as a teacher. And that's what they want you to do, to be fearful and to censor that stuff to yourself. Books are meant to be mirrors and windows. Yeah. We're supposed to see ourselves and then see into other cultures and other societies. And they don't want either of those. I know that, I grew up as a very, very poor kid. And I didn't see myself in the things I read until I got to college. Well, it was after college. It was my son who was in college, and he brought me this book called The Glass Castle. And I read that and I was like, oh God, that's me. That's the first time I saw me. That's the first time. And I was, way into adulthood. But that's the reason they do that. There were 2 librarians in Kansas that were fired a couple of weeks ago in Sterling, Kansas, because they had put together a display of books for kids when they were coming in, and it had a rainbow infinity sign, and then a child in a wheelchair with a rainbow projected behind it. Both of those logos are meant to encompass people who are neurodivergent, who are autistic, and also folks with disability. It had nothing to do with gay pride. They were fired over that because another person said they felt uncomfortable with those displays. And you're like, friends, it's not going to stop at the LGBTQ community. It will not. They're talking about people with disabilities and people who learn differently. And just a couple of weeks ago in Richland, Missouri, there was a pastor who said that autism was caused from demonic possession. And he was on the school board. Now, the good thing is that outrage caused him to resign from the school board. But if you think he's not still teaching that message every Sunday, you got another thing coming, right?
Right. Yeah, last fall we started interviewing women just because
they rarely have a voice.
Yeah, they rarely have a voice, and we just felt a personal need to interview more women. So one person led to another, and one led to another, and it ended up that we were interviewing abuse survivors from the church, and a lot of them were independent fundamentalist Baptist, or a significant amount of them were the Jane Doe, or we had 2 Jane Does from the Bill Gothard era. And all of that, it seems like, that thing that happened in the 70s and 80s where, there's a push to, we got to teach them God and pull them aside and make sure we know what they believe and what they think. And a lot of abuse came out of that. There's just wounded women everywhere from that. It seems like, there's another push again to do that, but that those people that are pushing that don't see the abuse side of it. I've been on a journey the last 8 years to deconstruct my faith after being a fundamentalist pastor. And the world has opened up to me. It's kind of like your story from earlier. And so it feels like I'm enlightened in so many areas. My life is not more immoral. It's not sinful.
Right.
It's beautiful. It's different, and it's when we start with fear and try to control, it always ends up that way. Right.
Well, and I think, honestly, I never would have said this until a few years ago, but growing up as a fundamentalist is trauma. It is traumatic.
Yep.
It is waking up in the middle of the night and hearing a sound and knowing that it is Jesus coming back and you are still there and you have missed it, and just waiting for the end of the world and trying to be what you can be and being submissive and doing what you're told. And it was meant to be that. It was meant to keep people, under someone's thumb, to make sure that they were frightened, and that they were fearful. And that's a terrible way to live. And that's why my first son I had when I was 20 years old, and we were still in the church, and, he went to Awanas and he did all the things. And then my last child, I was much older. I was 36 when I had her. And she's never been inside a church, and I will not take her to church until I can find something or believe that something is good for her. But I'm not going to tell her she's less than anybody else. I'm not going to tell her that abuse is okay. I'm not going to let her think the things that I thought. I'm not going to bring that trauma to my child.
I think that I think often about when did my deconstruction start? Usually it's when I'm driving to St. Joe or someplace to go where I've got some time to think. And I really do, like you were mentioning your children, and I really do think it was like the birth of our first child, our son, 32 years ago. And even though we continued going to church, and Karl did become a pastor and things like that, I remember walking into his room, and he was maybe 3-4 days old. And I just remember looking in his crib and just sobbing and saying, he's just so beautiful, and thinking, there's no way this child is wretched and sinful and gross. And, I was just like, I had nothing but absolute love for this child. And I was just like, there's nothing like bad or sinful about him. He's just precious. And he's, and I just remember Karl coming behind me. He's like, are you okay? I'm just like, he's just so beautiful, And
there was kind of a new level with our grandkids.
Gosh, yeah. I talk about that in our books. And I feel like this real, and probably because I have deconstructed, just this amazing sense of connection, even when they're not with me. Just feeling, our one granddaughter has not been feeling the best. And I notice like I kind of have some, and maybe it's psychological. I don't know, but I think of it as connection with her. She's not been feeling the best. And I've kind of been having some like sympathy symptoms, if you will, so yeah. And that's where I want to be, like when it comes to not only my children and grandchildren, but just other people, right? I just want to have this love and just look at them like, no matter what, like you're beautiful. So it's taken me a long time to get there, a lot of deprogramming, if you will, but man, it's like Karl was saying, it's just such a more beautiful place to live from.
It's hard to, when you, because I knocked, thousands of doors, and to hear people say over and over again, that they couldn't vote for me because they're a Christian. And it's so frustrating because you want to say, put up my policies and their policies and tell me which is more Christ-like. I think that your children should have funded schools and healthcare. I think you should have access to healthcare. I think you should have roads to drive on. There should be hospitals available to you. These are the things that I'm pushing for. And the person that I'm running against wants to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop. And you're like, and not fund the schools and make sure that children have access to loaded guns, right? But it's so hard because of where we are, because again, that extension of their Christianity they think is republicanism. It's hard to break that, even when they agree with you, even though they hear their policies and they're like, those policies sound really good. And you're like, yes, we are the party that, and Democrats aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But as long as we have two parties, there's only one that, I can get behind. There's only one that I can represent. And right now, that's being a progressive Democrat.
Yeah. We are, I believe both of us are registered independents, which means we don't get to influence or have any influence in the primary. But we live in the same kind of area that you do. That's about 25% Democrat. And that's kind of how it plays out. Like I said, there is some Christ-likeness in our communities that people just don't connect, and they don't, that phrase, the least of these, when you try to talk to people about that and how, whatever, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, these ideas and these things you're trying to do to control are actually hurting the least of these and not helping the least of these. When we talk to people, and your podcast is called The Dirt Road Democrat, again, make sure and go see that episode that she just recently recorded. But we asked people, what would you put on your billboard if you have a big social media influence, but if you had a billboard that you could show the whole world, what would you put on your billboard?
It's just what I think, my worldview for what I want for everybody, to be happy, healthy, and educated. Those things are the things that I push for. That's why I am constantly, every single day, waking up and talking about what's going on in education in Missouri. We're 49th in educational funding and 50th in teacher pay. And you know that very well. Yep. And our own son crosses over the border every day to go to Iowa to teach because they start out at $8,000 higher. But it's purposeful. Everything that the state of Missouri, you don't land in last place by accident. This is all on purpose. They have done this to defund schools, to transfer money, to defund them. And then they sort of, things go bad and they can say, look how bad the schools are doing. And you're like, you did it. You've been in control for 20 years. You did this. But then they can say, It's failing. It's a government school. We should be giving money to private schools, who may have better test scores. And we know why they have better test scores, because they get to pick their students. Public schools take everybody. Mm-hmm. But to funnel public tax money into private schools, and these folks are making money off of children, and they can discriminate. They can discriminate if the kiddo has any sort of learning or social emotional issue, or if they're rural, because you guys know there's no choice out here. Give me 20 vouchers. It doesn't matter. You just defunded my local school. I've got nowhere to go unless I do travel an hour to St. Joe one way. Mm-hmm. I mean, who could do that? Yeah. That's for the most privileged people. And guess what these private schools do? Once they get the public tax money, they raise their tuition. So it still keeps people like us out. It's meant to do that. And we're seeing it, playing out in red states across the country. And it's that Christian nationalism. Even if you did give me a voucher, where am I going to find a school that doesn't teach religion? I can't even think of one. I can't think of one. I can't even think of one in Kansas City that is a private school, that doesn't teach religion. So we're leaving out a population of folks. And by the way, we're not supposed to indoctrinate in school. That's what they're accusing us of, right? Is grooming and indoctrination.
Yeah.
When you teach the Bible, you are teaching biblical doctrine.
Yes.
It's the word.
Yeah.
Yes. I have a question, kind of a follow-up question to that. So, what can we do? What are some tangible things that Karl, that people listening can do to shift things? I try not to get too bummed out, because I'm just I really want to see change in my lifetime, and I don't know if I will. But I definitely want to, make a difference now, and hopefully, that will impact my grandchildren and my students that I have right now for the future. So what are some tangible things we can do to kind of shift things?
So the bad news is that we are up against very big money, and it's money coming in from everywhere. Since Citizens United was passed, people can accept millions of dollars. And one other piece of bad news is that they have captured the court. We now have a conservative court that will be in probably during our entire lifetime. So we're fighting against people who were put in that position with corporate money. We're past the days where, Supreme Court justices would recuse themselves from things that were obviously, a conflict. Now they don't. They just go for it. And they do it in the open. But I will say places like Michigan, which were red, were able to claw their way back out of it. But you have to understand that you're up against money, and you have to mobilize a whole lot of people. And we're not seeing that in Missouri. Missouri is a test ground. They're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, and then they're going to try it out in other places. Our lawmakers are not writing their own bills. These are coming down from bill mills like ALEC and that sort of thing, which is why we say the same bills in Iowa and Nebraska and Ohio and Texas and all those places, because they are the same bill. And they're trying to see which states they can get it through and how they got it through. It's like AI. They're learning, right? They're learning what works, and then they'll take it to other red states to do it. So as far as the schools go, you have to wake your neighbors up and tell them, 4 days a week is not better for your kid. They did it to keep us as teachers. They did it to placate teachers and say, we can't pay you more, but we'll give you an extra day. So when my friends say, I like 4 days a week, I'm like, I know it was meant for you. It was meant for you to keep you in that school. But we have to say it's 430 some odd days of school that they are missing compared to their 5-day peers, right? When you look at the best schools in Missouri, none of them are on a 4-day week, and none of them would ever be on a 4-day week because they know what happens. So it's rural people standing up and saying, we want the best for our kids. My daughter has a textbook that's old enough to vote, right? My daughter has a textbook that doesn't have a spine, that she can't open all the way because of the tape. That's not okay. Taking that to my neighbor across the street who is conservative and saying, look at this book. And she says, that's shameful. Why is that? And I say, because of the Republicans that we have elected, because we sent them to Jeff City, and this is what they did, because they don't care about you and they don't care about our kids. So it's waking up our neighbors, connecting the policy to the politician. This is a Republican problem. There has been no Democrat in your district. I can tell you this for sure. There has been no Democrat for 3 decades. Your district has never elected a woman. These are things that your neighbors should know, right? And the only way we get your neighbors to know that is to have somebody opposing Republican politicians. And the Democrats are not doing it. They are falling on their face. 40% of the seats go unopposed. And the reason I talk about Democrats is because they are the only people who can oppose the Republicans who are defunding schools. So the hope is this. The kids coming up are not cool with what's going on. Gen Z hates Republican policies. So we have hope in that, but we have to register them. We have to get them excited. We have to give them candidates to vote for. And that's how we make change. And we look to states like Michigan, and we see what they did, Wisconsin and, Minnesota. We see what they did and we try to replicate it here. But friends, we are so far behind in Missouri. I mean, we are so far behind to even talk about doing anything. The first thing is to get candidates.
We, the town that Laura used to teach in, and where our U.S. House of Representatives person comes from, recently did a it had to be like $1 million upgrade to their airport. It was closed down forever, and you saw construction equipment out there forever. At the same time, my wife was a teacher, and she would never get real active about this, but I sent a letter to Mr. Graves and said, how can you build an airport when you don't fund your school? I know the money doesn't come from the same places, right? But what's going on? He didn't respond. He put me on his newsletter, I think, or something like that, but there's all kinds of examples like that. But some of the more progressive pastors, I'm really kind of, I'm getting fed up with all theologians, but some of the ones that I respect a little bit still say, love is the answer. The hard part about that is we got to figure out how that plays out for each of us. And you really, don't change things like politics and religion until you change hearts. Right.
It's not loving to make sure that kids don't have an education. It's not loving to say that if your district doesn't have multi-million-dollar homes, then your kids don't deserve to be educated, because that's what they're telling us. It's not loving to make sure that, hospitals are closing and not care that people can get access to care, or to let a woman die of sepsis because there is an 8-week fetus inside of her. That's not loving. Their policies don't show love. And everyone is listening should be able to say that. If they say they are a Christian, if they say they love their community, go to their policies, right? Yeah. And this takes time. And this is why a lot of people don't pay attention, because it's time consuming to look at how people vote and what they're actually doing versus what they're saying they're doing, right? Because our representative that's up there now is a nice guy. I mean, I ran against him. He was a nice guy, but you know what he said? He was running for 2 reasons: to make sure that his grandkids had guns, and to make sure that his grandkids didn't have to eat plant-based meat. And you look around and you're like, those are the priorities? What is going on in the world? And he beat me in a landslide. And it's just you get to the point where it is so frustrating, because they say whatever they want. And when you're in a gerrymandered red state like this, where people think it's a Christian thing to do to vote for Republicans, you're up against so much. And people always say, I'm glad you stayed in it. I'm glad that you lost and you're still here. Well, what else can I do? Right. I can't move. This is where my kids and grandkids are. We have no choice but to keep standing up and fighting back.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, this has been a very eye-opening conversation for me. I feel compelled to do more. And I hope that there's a way that you and I can, both being educators, can stay in touch. So I know, I think that that's part of my problem is I don't know what to do. And so not that I need somebody to tell me all the time, but just knowing where those pockets of places are that I need to go and do. And I'm sure that there's listeners that are feeling the same way. So how can people find you? How can they touch base with you and go, okay, what should my next steps be? Because I don't know.
And always the first step should be reaching out to your representative, right? And then reaching out to your state senator and writing a letter or typing out a letter, because they don't ignore those. Now, when I say that, they read them. Now they may ignore you, just like they ignore me, just like Sam, when I said something about the obvious, like Tarkio has one of the best airports around, and you're like, what is up? What is up with that? When so many of your districts are 4 days a week, right? Because he's a pilot, because he flies in there, because it's everything is so self-dealing that they don't even hide it. They don't even care to hide it anymore. But people can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Piper from Missouri. On TikTok, I'm Jess Piper Mo. And I love TikTok. I don't dance. I do lots of keeping up with people with Missouri news. And then on the Dirt Road Democrat, which you can just go wherever you get your podcasts and search that, and it'll come up. But always start by talking back. Always start by standing up. And then you'll find others in your community who feel, because you and I have found each other now, right? And whenever I was running for office, I found those activists who were on the ground that I did not know were there. But we have to keep them activated by making sure that there are people running against the folks who are doing our communities harm. There is hope, though, right? I mean, there's hope. People tell me all the time, if you don't like it, move to California, move to New York. Nope. This is my state too. I am not going anywhere. I drew a line in the sand, and I will stand up every single time. You can sue me, you can threaten me, you can do whatever, but we have no choice. We have no choice. We have to stay, and to do that, we have to talk back.
Yeah, for sure.
Great advice.
Podcast again is called the Dirt Road Democrat, and the episode that we were talking about is called Prejudice Revealed, where Pastor Kirk is on with you, and you go in great detail about.
Can I do a little plug real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
So next week, January. What month is this?
September.
It's August. On August. It's September. My husband.
September.
See?
It's okay. We're all feeling that. It's like, what
So it's September 27th in St. Joseph at the Rolling Hills Library. Persisterhood is going to have a meeting, and Brian Kirk will be there, and I will be on the panel. Let's see, Maggie Nuremberg, who is running for Senate, and Crystal Quaid, who is running for governor. We will all be there in St. Joe, and we'll be talking about these things, what's going on. And it's a great time to catch up with Pastor Kirk and see what went on.
Awesome. Yeah, I just whispered to Karl, we should go to that.
You should. I would love to meet you guys in person.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed.
We'll put that on our calendars for sure.
Yeah, it's in September, not August or January.
Yeah.
Got it. September 27th, you said, right?
Yep, 6 o'clock.
At what time?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Okay.
All right. We got it. We'll touch base with you in the meantime. For the listeners out there, we're thankful that you tuned in. We appreciate each and every one of you that takes time to listen to us when you're driving down the road like we were on Friday night. Wherever you listen to your podcast, we're glad that you consider us and hope that you'll consider the Dirt Road Democrat.
Yes.
Jess Piper.
Yes.
As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
You are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.